All right, good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you. Welcome to week 2 of our September series. It is called Faith and Civility in the Public Square. So glad that you're here. If you're joining us on the live stream, we're glad that you're joining us on the live stream. We kicked this off last Wednesday night with Professor John Geer from Vanderbilt. And tonight we are joined by two very special guests. And I'm going to introduce them in just a minute. Let me just say a short prayer to begin, if that's okay. Loving God, thank you for this church, and thank you for the people that have come tonight to learn and to ask the question, how can we help lead the way in terms of civility and conversation in this culture? In Christ's name, amen. So I shared with you some principles last week. I'm not going to share them again about why we're doing this series, because a lot of people will look at this and say, why are you doing this series? Are you crazy? Do you really, you're asking for it. And I have a conviction that Woodmont Christian Church, it continues to be a big tent church, like Dr. Jawoda wanted way back in the day. And it is also what we call a purple church, in that we have Republicans and Democrats, independents, and people who are politically homeless and don't know what they are, and we're glad they're a part of our church. And if people of faith have been part of the problem or the challenge when it comes to polarization, then I also think we can be part of the solution. And so we're basically talking about civility and unity and what role does faith play in the public square. And tonight we have two very special guests. In the middle to my right is Mayor John Cooper. Mayor Cooper was elected 3 years ago. Before that, he was an at-large city councilman, and so he'll have his another year in his term. He is leading one of the fastest growing cities in the country. He has a lot on his plate, and so would you join me just in welcoming Mayor John Cooper being here tonight?
Thank you.
And then we've had Samar a couple of times this year, because she came to talk to us about the Russia-Ukraine situation. Samar is a research professor at Vanderbilt University. She is one of the co-chairs of the Vanderbilt Project on Unity and American Democracy, as well as the founders of A Million Conversations. And this is a topic that she thinks about all the time. So join me in welcoming Samar back to Woodmont. What I'd like to do to begin tonight is I kind of have a question for each of them, and then I have a question that we're just going to approach this kind of as a panel tonight. But I'm going to start with Samar, because you were here earlier.
Okay.
Could you give us just a quick snapshot with the Russia-Ukraine situation? What's going on? What has happened over the past week or 10 days? And anything you want to just kind of update us on?
Sure. So I actually just got back from Europe. I was in Switzerland, and there were 120 countries present at the convening that I was there for. And the sentiment was that, unfortunately, this is going to be a very long war. And that's the bad news. I would say the good news is that we saw a surprise turn of events over the weekend, in Ukraine taking back and pushing Russia back on territory that is greater the size of London. And so that, again, Ukraine surprised everyone with its strength and its perseverance and its courage in pushing back on Putin's Russia. And I also would say that two other things to be looking out for on that would be, one is that there's been an enormous amount of bipartisan support from the US side for coming to the aid of Ukraine. And so that muscle is being exercised, that bipartisan muscle, which gives me hope to see that, and coming to providing support for people who are in need, which means we can do that here at home. We are absolutely capable of that. If we're capable of it internationally, we're capable of it here for our own community. And the second thing is, as we sit here right now, Putin is meeting with China, and he has a meeting, and I think we're going to be watching to see which way China leans, and how it engages with Russia versus Ukraine, and how that affects the world order over the next 1 to 2 years.
That's great. Thank you so much. One of the interesting things about having both of them here tonight is we have this balance of how this topic plays out locally and nationally. And so we're gonna talk about that. Mayor Cooper, thank you for being here. You you lead our city. It is a very busy city. There are many different things that are going on all the time. It's called the It City. People continue to move here from all over. I want to ask you about, there's certain issues that I think there's definitely bipartisan support, consensus when it comes to things like infrastructure and public education, even though the nuances of that can be tricky. What do we do about homelessness as the city continues to grow? And that is certainly a challenge. And this church has been a part of Room in the Inn for many years. Many other churches have. But what are the things that you see as mayor where there is common ground and people do want to focus on and get behind initiatives that take on those types of issues?
Well, it's marvelous to be here. Thank you for having me. My youngest son just became an Eagle Scout in the troop downstairs last month, so it's a great bag, Troop 92. And thank this church for supporting that troop over the years. It's been fantastic. City elections are nonpartisan. Not only recently did the legislature make school board races partisan, and it is nonpartisan a little bit for a reason, because mostly at the city level, it is not really that ideological. It is about services and management. There's trash, there's sidewalks, there's education. So the commonality of us needing a collective solve and management is where you start from. Now, it can dissipate, but it often is not as much on national ideological lines as it is kind of physical principles. Should we borrow more money and spend it over here? Did we not get value for what we thought we were doing? There is a problem in that it used to be the famous Democratic Speaker of the House used to say all politics are local. Well, increasingly now everybody agrees that the axiom is that all politics are national, because often politics come back to the community from a national media platform. And the nationalization of local politics ends up being a problem. I had a personal experience in this. In 2020, in the fall, the media commentator Tucker Carlson had an entire show dedicated to my impeachment. And it was based on a local Fox News story that was retracted almost as quickly as it was aired. It was demonstrably untrue. You may remember I used to be on television a lot on daily press conferences. On COVID, you could go back to the press conference and literally point to the words that it was not true. Well, the retraction is never as powerful as the original story.
Right.
And Tucker Carlson has, in that era, his viewership was way up, like 150,000 viewers in Davidson County. The local station that broadcast the original story may have only had 2,000 or 3,000 viewers. But it was a story that fit a very powerful national narrative at that moment and seemed to fit what the national media wanted to say. And so immediately, here's one more evidence. Oh, it's not true, right? And it basically had something to do that our COVID cases downtown were not high enough on their own to require masks at that moment. But the CDC was very certain that we were spreading it like wildfire, and those cases the next week would spike a great deal. So why don't you go ahead and have masks, which is what we did, and we carefully said that the evidence is not enough, just to go into the details as I kind of am reliving that moment. But that is a level of divisiveness that we used not to have.
They took the story and ran with it, and even though they pulled it back, the damage gets done.
And you've got a national narrative coming back to the local community. It used to be that local stories went national. Right. Now a national interpretation is going local to a degree that it is, kind of surprising. So if we sit and focus on common purpose, you can go back to removing some of the divisive tension at the local area. Now, surprisingly, homelessness has been, it's a shared goal. It's all something that's something has to be done on this. It has now been months delayed to having a council vote on a $50 million plan to decisively change the city's arc in homelessness. How could that even be delayed? Yeah. Well, we manage in this era of culture wars to kind of misinterpret each other's intentions. Mm-hmm. Are you the kind of let's interpret a homeless story in a way that fits into kind of our cultural predispositions in a way that has created a delay. Now, I hope in October the 5th, we can finally get that $50 million program moving, but you have to kind of listen through the words to understand our common purpose. And in a red state, blue city, you've got all kinds of moments of potential tension.
Let me ask this question. So back to you, Professor Ali. What I hear Mayor Cooper saying is the national polarization is impacting local government's ability to get things done, even when there should be consensus, right. Common sense consensus. Why are we so polarized?
I think there's not one answer. So there's not, unfortunately, there's not one answer. It's complex. But what I will say, I think at the underlying core of so much of this is, and what's contributing to the culture wars, is how we communicate with each other, how we are relating to each other. The trust deficit that's between us as neighbors, between us and our government, and quite frankly, between many Americans and democracy, as we've talked about before here together. So I think that this disinformation problem, this misinformation problem, and an extreme minority of individuals that I think are benefiting from what we call at Millions of Conversations, the hate industrial complex, who are spinning these narratives to continue to divide us, which is contributing to polarization, and also, quite frankly, using our elections as a tool and as a mechanism to push a zero-sum agenda rather than to really create space for compromise. And democracies, I think, are healthiest when we have compromise, when we embrace compromise, and when we have an informed electorate. Well, how do you have an informed electorate? You have to have access to information that's anchored and rooted in the truth. If you have people, so this has been happening now, arguably for decades, and I think that it's torpedoed in the wrong direction for the past decade, and we've seen this, and the mayor lived through this as well. I mean, my God, Mayor Cooper, you've had quite the past 3 years, I mean, including the Nashville Christmas bombing, and the person who, really radicalized on disinformation and became a was engaging with all kinds of different conspiracy theories, which also kind of ended his life. And so I think that we've seen this, and I'll just say this and I'll stop here, but before I moved back home to Tennessee, when I worked at the White House, part of my portfolio was Homeland Security. And we saw this happening. We saw this on the horizon. And the question that was upon us, which I don't think we've yet answered, which is, what is the role of the government in this moment? And what is the role of civil society?
Mayor Cooper, what would you add?
Thank you, and I agree with Samar. I guess I want to go back a little bit as to why do our communities feel so challenged enough that it's hard to have a discussion. We definitely have a media change, which is worth spending some time on. You also have a lot of society change, and what I hear is it's a product of a culture that's creating this, that we as a society moved too much. Where are you from? Another community, moving along. Our children have moved somewhere else. Our parents are somewhere else. let's not overlook the massive amount of drug use in America that sounds old-fashioned, but both prescription, then you've got an alternative reality. I mean, people used to complain when I was a kid about people watching too much TV. Screen time, people are in an alternate reality so much. And then you've got the economic dislocations that are going. What kind of job are my children going to be working at? It's going to be a company that is not going to have a pension, is not really going to look after them. Capitalism has kind of changed in a market sense that adds a certain amount of just kind of dislocation and lack of comfort, where very few of us are going to go to work in what your parents did. Now, there's some teachers and there's some nurses to be able to do that, but the digital economy, the change from agriculture to industrial was huge, from industrial to service is huge, from service to digital is super huge too, and that's combined with people just kind of moving too much. And then you see you can benchmark the lack of community with certain other things. Negative political campaigning, right? Once upon a time, that was kind of a nervy thing to do, and we're not sure that the community is going to accept it. Now it's de rigueur, right? That's all that we know. You have a kind of detached public space from the private space that used not to happen, right? How we miss the days of the Tennessee and the Banner, how we miss Demetria Kalodimos, right? Unifying voices that, visited 30, 40, 80, 100,000 people at one point with the same level of information. Now everybody has different information. It took the newspaper, so Gutenberg invents the printing press, and it takes like 150 years before you come up with a newspaper that's sort of useful, that has headlines, you can organize it while you're reading the stories. Even the reporting of the stories takes a long time to come out. Now you've got digital media. I mean, the iPhone is less than 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And how you organize mass communications with each level of communication has created a different governmental and society impact, even down to elections. In America, the steam printing press created a different politics from the radio era, which created a different politics from the TV era. And the social media is clearly creating a different politics under our feet right now as we exist. And then you put that with a, market economy. I mean, capitalism, it's easy for young people to kind of say capitalism isn't evolving quickly enough, but there's some truth to that. Right. The role of how you work, your career, your employment, your occupation is also uncertain. You're gonna get a freak out level.
So one of the obvious answers, that people would say is, billion-dollar industry cable news almost exists to keep us divided, to keep us angry, to keep us worked up, and to keep us listening in silos.
Well, social media too. And so I think there's the metaverse.
That was what I was going to add. Social media on top of that. Yeah, please go.
No.
No. So the question is, if we're immersed in cable news, social media, then how do we get back to a place where people are dealing with a common set of facts? Because right now they're not. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I'm listening.
No. So I think it's an online and offline solution. And so I think what it gets to is really what we're talking about is reality and your relationship with reality, and how facts and your experience with facts shape your truth. And so we're having this online experience and we're having an offline experience. So, for example, how many people here were online today? In one capacity or another, sent a text message, engaged with something online. So it looks like everybody. How many of you might check your phone before you go to sleep? Most everybody. And here we are together right now, not online, except for the people who are streaming.
We have some folks online.
People in person in this room, here we are engaging as human beings with each other.
Face to face.
Face to face, physically. how is that going to, and having a conversation around polarization, and then we might go online and read something about polarization in an echo chamber that we're in. That's going to be shaping our understanding of this issue and our experience with this issue. Well, which one is real? Is this real? Is the online experience real? Are they both real? Because you're having a real experience. And so I think really kind of getting to this is we have to figure out how we're going to live in this new environment. How do we, in a healthy way, engage online with each other and establish positive online norms, a code of conduct, societal norms, a social contract? We can think of a lot of different language and terms that we want to use to describe this, but that helps bring us together around common values for a shared future in the public square. And the public square is going to be physical and it's going to be virtual, and it really needs to, if we get it right, it's going to blend into the same public square. Now, what I think we have seen is that to date, people have been radicalizing online. We have seen this. Negative norm setting environments are happening online. How do we disrupt those? How do we hack the algorithms and create positive norm setting environments, positive norm setting messages online that move people away from the negative and towards the positive? And that's some of the things that we're testing right now. And there are ways to do this, and this is one of the things that we're doing at Millions of Conversations. A lot of people for a while were scratching their heads saying, what is it that's happening here? One of the things that we did in our early on research projects was we hired an ad agency, MNC Saatchi, to test messaging with people that we know were being targeted with negative, hateful, demonizing messages of the other online. We knew they were being targeted as people who were vulnerable to polarization. And then we countered it with positive messaging online to see if they moved from being vulnerable to actually moving to more towards the positive direction of a community building direction. And we were relieved to see that they did. And that gave us hope. And it was like, okay, how do we systematize this? How do we scale this? How can this work? And I think there's a lot of experimentation right now that's going on. And this is happening, by the way, the whole world is struggling with this issue right now. And if the United States can crack this issue, once again, we can help set exceptional answers to common day problems. And we can be very innovative in doing that. And I think that this is a global challenge that if we put our minds and efforts and resources behind, we can help solve and crack an issue that will help the entire world.
Now, if I can ask a question, distilling it, what you're saying, is this the curbing of pushed content by large media companies so that they're not, you ask what you want to know, but you're not being pushed message by a internet entity?
That's part of it,
okay.
Yes.
All right, because people are we're as toxic as the tank of water that we're in.
Right.
And if you clean up the water, people will respond well to that. That's what the research shows. Well, super.
Yeah.
So they're implying some level of regulation on our media parties, the same way that the FCC used to regulate airwaves.
Yeah, and that's another question too. Should they be considered publishers? Should they be considered broadcasters? I think these are some of the questions that our legislature needs to grapple with.
Mayor Cooper, would you say a little bit more about how the national polarization, cable news, social media, and just the national narrative impacts and plays out on the local level and makes your job much more challenging perhaps today than it was for Mayor Bredesen or one of your predecessors? Meaning, how do you see this, infiltrating the issues that Nashville faces, and you kind of might be banging your head against the wall saying this shouldn't be that hard, but it is because...
Well, it certainly is. And I'm sure there's always a challenge in every moment in every generation. You do have this national finding, in part because people moving here from somewhere else bring their politics with them. Right. And to some degree, separately, complain a little bit. Not only are people bringing their politics with them, they often there's a self-organizing model. An awful lot of people are moving to Nashville because they're avoiding taxes elsewhere.
Yeah, we like to joke with the California people. Remember why you left California, right? You come to Tennessee. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, so then it's a big country, so you can get that extra 1,000 people or 10 or 20,000 people who feel very strongly on that system. And so we've self-collected a national attitude often that is, you can overweight that element in your community, and you kind of stop being a community. Aspen, Colorado probably doesn't really represent Colorado that well anymore. At one point, it sort of did. So you do worry about to what degree we're beginning to self-identify, not with Tennessee, but elsewhere in the country. I'm old enough that I can remember in my own lifetime pollsters telling me the most remarkable thing about polling in Tennessee, this goes back 40 years, was the similarity of opinion between Nashville and the rest of Middle Tennessee, okay? That they did not know that they were calling people in Nashville because the opinions of people in Nashville were so similar to the people in Williamson and Murray County. Now, 40 years later, no pollster would say that that is true. That in fact, you could instantly tell from the response what county that you were polling in. That's a huge change in our lifetime. And again, some of that is, are we self-organizing in a way? I mean, university towns historically always have. Now we're a university city, actually. It's not a terrible way of thinking about Nashville as a university city with the music industry and then with healthcare IT. But so you're not avoiding the national perception of issues. So locally, you have to confront that mindset and dispel it. So something I end up having to do a lot is people get very frustrated, as we all are, with affordable housing. And often you hear in that discussion, not Nashville data or Tennessee data, but rebaked California data, as though we were in California. Now in California, they have a big problem building more product. We do not have that problem in Nashville, right? We have 22,000 units under construction right now, 13% of our existing stock, right? That is not a California affordable housing problem. Our affordable housing problem is probably a little bit different than that. So you have to accept the mindset that I'm going to come here and criticize you as though it were California, and to go back to getting people to look at the local facts on the ground, and that we have the ability to be successful here in areas that other places have failed. So don't you be bringing that failure here, okay? It was a saying I had a couple of years, everybody who comes here wants to create the fix for the city that they left here.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
But you live here now.
But you live here now. It is different. I get it that the MTA was super slow in Chicago, but that's not our exact problem. So educating people back into the local reality of our community is very important. And part of that ends up with information. And my own personal solution to the problem that Samar is diagnosing is just for Nashville to do it differently, and that to be successful enough that other places say, you don't have to fight all the time. You can in fact solve problems. Look what they did in Nashville.
Exactly.
And that is my personal goal.
Yes.
Did you add something?
I agree completely. I think that we can do that, and it's exciting. It's to step up and rise to that challenge in Nashville and in Tennessee, and say, let's replicate. Let's create a solution that's scalable for the country and the world. And why not here? And why not now?
I want to put these two questions kind of together because I want you to take whichever one you'd like, or either of them. But what role should faith play in the life of a public servant, whether it's on the local level, the state level, the national level? And then the second part is, if Christians have been a part of the problem when it comes to division, polarization, anger, demonization, how can Christians, we're in a church, we're trying to do this as members of Woodmont Christian Church and as a part of this community, how can Christians begin to lead the way in restoring civility, respect, and decency to the culture? So I don't know which one of those you may want to pick up on. That's a lot, but I kind of look at them,
divide them, right?
Yeah, or divide them. If you want to start with either one, Professor Ali, would you like to pick up with one of those?
I think you should go first. I was just going to say, I think you are already doing this. I think, and just even by congregating here tonight and having this conversation and building community together. I mean, every time I walk in here, I feel community. That's exactly what I feel. And it's very exciting. And as you said too, at the beginning, you set these principles for this 4-part series. You're doing that work, and you said we want to have an open tent. This is about, widening the tent, and that's what this is about. Well, what you're talking about is community. And that's the whole theme running through, I think, this entire conversation this evening has been community, and we're in a place of worship, and we're doing this work together. And as you know, I went to I think you might know, I don't know if you know this or not, but growing up, my education, I went to a Baptist school and a Catholic school and a public school and then a former Methodist school. And one of the things that really stuck with me in my Bible studies class in particular was that love thy neighbor. And this is about loving thy neighbor. This is about being neighbors. And what does it mean to be neighborly with each other? What does it mean to turn the other cheek? What does that mean? What do these lessons and faith mean for us as a society that's really struggling with our own humanity right now?
Mayor Cooper, what would you add?
Well, you certainly need faith to get through being a public servant, but it is...
I've heard that from many public servants.
Yes, right. You just kind of have to park it there and rely on God, providence, to help you. We all need that extra strength. But as the general role of faith in society and America, I mean, it's from faith that you have values. And if you don't have values, you're not headed in any direction. You do have to have a sense of good and evil, frankly, and also of redemption. Because so much of our work is based on a faith-based belief that we can be redeemed and have progress, both as individuals and as a collective, as a society. And in America, so much of what we take for granted has been created by faith. Protestantism and education go hand in hand. The first use of the property tax was in Puritan New England to fund schools. Why? Because you needed to be able to read the Bible before you could be saved. Education was fundamentally part of our culture, our values. Now, I think the whole world has adopted the primacy of education, but for a long time, America was unrivaled in its literacy and its number of high school graduates because we, more than any other country, took education as a public right and not as an elite. And then also this odd public servant it ends up being a calling. You were called, I think to some degree. I am called. Anybody in the public space feels like they're being called. And that is a faith-based idea, right? That you can be called, that somehow you have an obligation back to your fellow human beings to share your skills if you believe in your skills for the benefit of the whole. And I certainly tried my best not to run for mayor in 2019, famously. And in the end, I couldn't live with that decision because I felt I had sort of been called to share my skills, which in that case was a lot about finance and getting us out of receivership and bankruptcy, and and that if you did that, you could be in service to the public. And Even today, I was handed a note, our water department, which sounds like a small thing, is just debt of financing at a AAA credit rating. 3 years ago, it was officially a distressed utility and on the watch list for, in effect, insolvency.
Well, you had to make a really hard decision in the middle of a pandemic to address it.
In the middle of a pandemic. And why is the water department so important? Well, your property taxes come in on February. You have to borrow money to get you to February when the property taxes come in if you have no cash. And then the state was going to say you can't borrow any money from an external source because we don't think you're good enough stewards to be allowed to borrow from the outside. So the city for some years had been borrowing from the water department to get to February, and then all of a sudden the water department seems like it's bankrupt. You really have no options in that environment. But anyway, it's a long way of addressing faith in public life, and you have to have it.
Professor Lee, what would you say?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's very personal. I think we have in the United States, we have the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment, which very clearly draws a line between basically church and state. I think there's that. And then there's, though, when you're in your day-to-day work, and the public servant using it as working for the public sector, working for the government. And you never want to, in my opinion, with that in mind, because whenever you're representing constituents, you're representing people in America, people come from very different backgrounds. So you might have people that you're representing that are Baptist. You might have people that you're representing that are Catholic. You might have people that you're representing that don't practice their faith or religion, and people who are Muslim, people who are Jews, people who are Hindu, Baha'is, etc. And then, so there's that piece of it. So then you think about, what is the role of faith when I'm at my desk? What is the role of my faith? And I think that's a different question. And that gets to the piece of, you have to have faith, you have to have hope, but also how does that guide you in the decisions that you're making? And when it's just you and the pen, or maybe it's you in a room where you're having to make a very difficult decision in terms of how you spread or you distribute wealth. What's the role of faith in that decision? How does that play out? And I think that it would be hard to give one answer for how that plays out, because I think it's different for every individual. And I can remember moments of when I definitely, when I worked in government, said a prayer, that I was making the right decision. And I think that faith played a role in that moment too for me. Am I doing the right thing? Did I do the right thing today? Could I have done better? And who can I learn from, and where can I turn to? And are there stories from sacred texts that I can glean experience from? And also thinking about moments of divine intervention. So I think that there's the faith, and then there's the spiritual. So yeah, and then I've also obviously seen people who have who don't practice a religion, who've been excellent public servants.
One of the things that bothers me, just from an observation standpoint, is that it seems like we live in an era now where people can no longer listen to or be exposed to a position or a belief that they don't agree with without feeling threatened. Mm-hmm. And so we have this kind of mindset to where you have to, you hear the message, and if you don't like it, then you have to go attack the messenger and saying, no, I don't really see it that way. Let me share with you how I see it. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but why are we there? Why are we threatened when we hear a perspective or a belief or a policy that we don't agree with? Why can't we simply listen and then say, I appreciate you sharing that, but let me share with you how I see it? Well, I don't feel like our culture seems to be losing that ability. Why is that?
Well, I'll be brief. I think we have to go back to basics. I think we all need to take the pledge to listen to each other. I think that we've gotten just really far away from that skill and that muscle memory of listening to each other, which is so important. I also think whenever people are getting their backs up, people are hurt. I mean, I kind of like get into going back to basics as well about as being a human being of what's going on here, that people are angry, they're hurt, they're upset, they don't feel like they belong. There's a lot of insecurity that's happening right now. People feel detached, and they don't feel that things are working as they should be working, and they miss community. I mean, we see this a lot in our research. Again and again, people are saying, coming back to that, they miss community. And they miss a code of conduct for community of how we engage with each other. So it's maybe sounds very simplistic, but we kind of need to go back to reminding ourselves, what is it like to be human? And I have a toddler. I have a less than a 2.5-year-old at home right now. And I think about sometimes when she has a tantrum, when she's upset, like what are the kind of calming techniques that you can use there when somebody doesn't get their way or you haven't given them the answer that they want. It's because we're also used to just like instantly, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn you off, or whatever. And it's easier to be in our echo chambers. It's become easier and easier for that to happen. But the more we build community, online and offline, and commit to rules of engagement with each other, says this is how we want to be with each other. I'm going to work on this. The better we become as a society from the individual level all the way up to the societal level.
So the issue of respect, I think you've touched on that. Seems like the culture has shifted a little bit, and maybe that's the product of 100 years of consumerism. I mean, brands are only 100 years old. There was You Need a Biscuit, which is a little bit older than that. Maxwell House Coffee is a little bit older than that, but you have a consumer culture where you had instant gratification. You had a culture that is kind of trained that if you're not always getting what you want, and you worry in the late empire that that's kind of a bad trend, and you don't have the natural practice of gratitude in the society, I suspect, that the country had. Part of that was farm life, because in farm life, you're controlled by the weather. This is a divine gratitude for the weather giving you a better harvest, and then now you're not ever looking up or out in a type of gratitude. It is a little bit more, how can I be served? And then you have a problem, I think, in that wealth in some cases seems to be illegitimate. And in a society where it was not created by hard work, or you stayed out and tended the animals longer, or you put that extra effort into it, that somehow in modern life it's unfair, and I've been dealt with unfairly, and I deserve more. You're beginning to create a kind of a massive alienation that I think reveals itself often in what you take as the lack of respect. But so
Can I ask you on the wealth being illegitimate? Can you say more about that? Is that wealth being passed down from generation?
The Protestant work ethic was that you could work hard and make your way in America. Now, to some degree, on both sides, that is under challenge.
Right.
That you worked hard and did not have the rewards, so that you have an unfair system, unnecessarily oppressing you and not giving you the same opportunity. That would be a narrative. And another narrative is, who even knew when I was young that you could have a billionaire, much less people that are so vast? Are they the wealthiest people of all time in history that would make John D. Rockefeller seem like middle class? Well, maybe. How does it weigh in that end? And once you have in wealth inequality, you have a little bit of undermining of, am I having a fair shake in life? And why shouldn't I be mad if I'm not having a fair shake in life? And you get a little bit of alienation that creeps in. And, sometimes I feel like I'm dealing with people that think that Terminator movies are true. Okay? Yeah. And that they need to be armed to resist the state that's coming in to oppress them. Well, that may happen at some point in the future, but there's very little evidence of that now. Right. But we're in kind of a different place mentally
And I think it
from
gets to the
that.
belonging piece too. People aren't feeling that they
So
belong.
let me ask this question to both of you, and then I do want to save some time for Q&A. So there's a lot of people that don't think the economy works for them anymore. We've seen that in the last 2 presidential elections. Part of Donald Trump's rise in America was speaking into that, to people that feel like the jobs have left the small town, nobody cares about me. One author put it, there's a disconnect between the somewheres and the anywheres.
That's the key word,
What's
disconnect.
that?
That's the
There's
key
a
word,
disconnect. And there's people that feel like, I don't feel like this country works for me anymore. I feel like I'm being looked down upon by the elites. I feel like there are other people out there that are making all kinds of money and I can't seem to get ahead even if I work harder. So how do we address that going forward, both nationally and locally?
Well, locally, it's to have a successful city that is able to spread opportunity out to everybody that is here. And it's a little bit hard. I mean, you're welcoming a whole lot of people into our success, but I think it's a critical laboratory for showing success in the 21st century, particularly in the ability to make the digital economy successful for our children, so that they end up having very successful lives and careers going forward. That would be the first answer in this. I mean, again, we just had a kind of a sociological discussion. It's very hard for politics to cure sociology.
Right.
Right. Professor Ellie?
2 things I think we have got to deal with. And one of the first things we connected on Mayor Cooper several years ago was on this issue. And both of us agreeing on it. And that is, we have to address corruption. And we have to address corruption on every level. And we also have to address hypocrisy. People are tired of it. And so we've got to say what we mean, and we have to do what we mean. And people have to start feeling that they're a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem. So we have to speak about each other in that way, rather than talking about each other as problems. What if we talked about each other as solutions? What if we related to each other in that way? It's a mindset shift. If we move away from the scarcity mindset to a growth mindset, and we have a healthy capitalistic society in the 21st century that engages with the digital economy and thinking about what that looks like. And people always say, we've talked a lot in this room about war, right? Well, and we oftentimes will say war is inevitable, but we don't talk enough about how, well, what if peace is inevitable? Can't peace be inevitable? And if peace is inevitable, what does that look like? How do we have peace with each other? What does peace mean and look like and feel like? And how can we maintain that so that we don't have to experience conflict and division and polarization that leads to sustainable violence and war? This is now upon us, this decade. Right. And I think that all of us in this room are leaders in our own right, in our own homes. And it starts with us. It really, truly does. It starts with the language that we use, the decisions that we make on a daily basis, and with each other and how we relate to each other.
Both of you know, was born and raised in Memphis. My father pastored a church there, and a lot has happened in Memphis over the past week and a half.
Yes.
Not only the awful situation with Liza Fletcher, but then what happened actually a week ago tonight with the shooting spree that went on in Midtown Memphis. And Memphis has always had its challenges. Nashville has its challenges. But as you're speaking, I'm thinking about war playing out on the global stage with Russia and Ukraine and all the countries that are involved via proxy and money. But guess what? On the local level, when the gap between the haves and the have-nots grows large enough and people become desperate, then they will do what they have to do to take care of their families. It's not a justification, but that does play out locally as well. And so, Mayor Cooper, any thoughts on how we look out for not just the homeless, but the working poor? That's something we're commanded to do in Scripture, and it seems like we agree we should do it, but the way we do it is where we can't agree. How we do it.
Well, how you do it and what's effective, and how do you get opportunity out to people? I think Samar was right on in that you have to show that you have a fair, equitable society where the rules apply to everybody and you don't have an overwhelmed government by a special interest purpose. And it's the kind of the old-fashioned civic commonality of both purpose and delivery of services is fundamental to pulling us out of this mess. The problem of gun crimes is great, and we do seem to be in a moment that is hard to do that much about it. So some of it is suggestibility. I mean, how does it even occur to anybody to break into a school and shoot children? I mean, could Satan have thought of a more horrible even? But once that thought of that evil is out there, then for people, the suggestibility becomes a real thing. So we spent an extra $4 million this year hardening the entrances of our schools. Our police, almost on a daily basis, rehearse what if. There was I think a crank call at a high school today suggesting some sort of problem. Locked down, shut down, because you have to take that stuff so seriously because of the media influence suggestibility of really unthinkable things. And you have, it's not just big internet companies that are pushing out content. The whole media likes to push out horror. Sometimes it's news, and of course it deserves to be reported, and then sometimes you're planting seeds to mentally less strong people that this is something to do, and then almost every car has a gun in it. So if you break the window and go through the car, you can find a gun. You've broken into a car, you have a gun, or you're already on the loose. And then you have to resort to, maybe we are a little bit in a Terminator movie, you have to resort, I hope, to something, a pilot project that was difficult to get through the council, called license plate readers. Well, what are they? They're cameras stationed at key intersections that you're able to key in the license plate of the recently carjacked car and then track them, follow them around. The police do not have the ability to do that, but weirdly technology makes that very easy. Well, so you're fighting one technology problem with another technology problem. You're extending the police department, and then in time, if you're so effective at catching people with license plate readers, then people will go, well, you don't do that.
Right.
You don't do that. But the problem of violence in Nashville, we're a little bit grateful and listening to the chief carefully, and he's a great chief, and he worries so about each case. Our homicide level is, a third of Memphis's, but still too hard. And then there's another aspect of the homicide level is how many of these people knew each other? That it was a domestic problem that had guns. And if they didn't have a gun, there would have been a different outcome. Now, you can't solve that right away, but it's a little bit less intense than a third-party spree where people are shot. Now, you need to respond a little bit differently by beefing up your domestic programs for security, to get people out of those houses, to have pet shelters so that people can take their pet shelters with them, and de-stress the situations that may lead to this level of violence, which is a significant part of our homicide number here in Nashville. Now, we still have some of the other, to be sure, but then, often that is a drug issue, and then often that is young people who've been lured into this, and so the importance of the violence interruption work of being involved with kids when they're 12 and 13 and 14, of sports leagues, and the police athletic league is getting involved in that. All are positive things that you can do as a city.
And be proactive in the approach.
And that's going back to community-based solutions, and this is key.
Well, I want to stop because we could talk all night. Roy, my dad, is going to, I want to open the floor. If you have a question, please make it a question. Put your hand up if you'd like a question for either Mayor Cooper or Professor Ali, or both of them, and we'll take some.
I will ask
we'll take some time for questions tonight. There we go. I think we got one in the back. Yeah.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. Just a public service announcement. You mentioned, Doctor, that we might be able to solve some of these problems right here in Nashville, Tennessee, and in Tennessee. And as a matter of fact, Bill Haslam and Phil Bredesen started a podcast just today called You Might Be Right, that might be worth listening to. But I do have a question. Have any of your studies addressed loneliness and the effect of loneliness on the polarization in America?
Absolutely, yes. That is a big issue that comes up with one of our research partners, Dr. Jonathan Metzl. I don't know if you have met Dr. Jonathan Metzl or been exposed to his work, but I would highly recommend it. And I can send you some of his resources, and also we could invite him to brief you on his research that he does with us on loneliness, because it is one of the key underlying issues that we're seeing behind gun violence in America today, along with the relationship that people are having with the healthcare system as well, and that's impacting the sense of belonging in the country, and the anger issues too. And he is by training a psychiatrist.
And something, well, I was going to say Robert Putnam at Harvard has been tracking the decline in social connection since the 1960s, and I would say that COVID was, when it comes to loneliness and disconnection, that it was amplified.
Well, and this
right?
is what came up. So we just recently did, and it will be, we're under an NDA until the research is public. But I can share that we just did a research project with Dr. Metzl over the past 6 months with the Commonwealth Fund on how COVID affected loneliness levels. And,
that'll be very interesting.
That's why I also think it would be good to get Dr. Metzl here himself.
Claire Dwarda. Oh no, you're standing next to Claire. Okay, sorry, I thought you had a question. Does anybody else have a question, or I keep asking? I see one over here in the middle. Chip has a question.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for being with us tonight. And I heard, and I don't know whether this is factual information or not, that the council had passed a ordinance that was to be effective the 1st of July, making it unlawful for homeless people to spend the night on either public or private property. First of all, is that a fact?
I don't think so quite, but if I can, I think the state of Tennessee did.
Okay.
That as a state law on state property, excuse me, and this was part of a little bit of the challenging environment, because that law, whether you agree with it or not, isn't solving the problem. It's just pushing them onto metro property. Okay. And then in our own council, there has been an action not to allow the relocation from camps, which has been a little bit challenging because you've had some public health crises in camps, and that's one of the reasons I'm such an advocate for the passage of this $50 million plan coming up in early October. If I can, for a moment, PSA a little bit. The City of Nashville needs to adopt a housing first approach, and where the housing first approach is to build lots and lots of low barrier housing alternatives for each particular type of homelessness: men, women, addicted, mental health problems. There's counseling and a program that goes with each of this so that you can go to everybody and get them out of being unsheltered and into housing alternatives that are effective. Housing first, where it has been tried in America, has been very effective. The city of Milwaukee has less than 20 chronic homeless people right now. Now, that's an incredible achievement, but it requires a big capital spending investment up front to prepare the housing, to have the counseling, that then you can reintroduce people back. And in the meantime, winter is coming. By some estimates, 200 unsheltered people lost their lives in Davidson County in the last year, because it is literally that cruel. Now, some of it is drug addiction, some of it is being out in the street. It's an unthinkably difficult reality to accept, but we need to do something about it with the counseling. We have never been organized well enough in Nashville to get the same federal assistance that we've had before. Need to be able to get. All this is moving in the right direction, so let's get on with it before winter comes. Let's adopt this and let's start creating units. We have 90 units under construction right now in downtown, just by the old 2nd Avenue fire hall, but we really need hundreds of more. There are about 500 chronic homeless people in Nashville. That's the same number for the last 10 years. Now, there are 2,000 unsheltered people in Nashville, but that 1,500 will come and grow and build back and are much easier to deal with. But anyway, thank you. The specifics of your question is, yes, under the state of Tennessee, it is illegal to camp overnight on state property.
All right. Question over here. Edith.
Oh.
Hello. I understand that many people considered Bordeaux Hospital as a possible homeless site. And to me, that makes sense, but so I'm asking you a question of why that couldn't be used to some degree about this homeless situation.
The Memorial Hospital in Madison?
No,
Oh,
Bordeaux.
Nashville.
Over, next to...
The excellent, and I think with the $50 million, I think all kinds of locations need to be utilized for quite a variety of housing. So I will go home and remind people that we do have the facilities that we can use. The famous Brookmead camp has been with us since 2001. This is now 21 years. This is not a new thing. This has been something that has happened in Nashville a long time. We just never responded particularly well to it. And other cities, Nashville has a sister city in Canada, Edmonton, Alberta, which is way up there in the frozen north, a little bit bigger city than we are, but has a much worse homeless problem than we do. It is not just American cities and not just American cities in the South that have this problem. This is a fitting into the economy. This is mental health is deeper than we think.
Is a big part of
You've got addiction is a accelerant to all of this. Whatever problem you're doing, addiction issues can undo it in a heartbeat. It is not necessarily affordable housing in your area, though that ends up being an additional challenge.
Well, one of my understandings is that the neighborhood that's a challenge you're going to have all the way around.
Yeah. Well, and getting neighborhood acceptance of these facilities, of these alternatives for people, I don't think you can have it too big in one place. I think you do have to get people to accept it in the right location, all in the end, all around the city. And right now, the concern is that the state is just driving homeless people from what used to be state property into metro property and out into the neighborhoods. And I do urge people who might see something in their neighborhood, go to Hub Nashville and let us know with your eyes and ears so that we can get people there to make sure that they are given an alternative. I see somebody in the audience today. I know they went and saw a unsheltered person and they offered assistance, the mental health pipeline, social workers, food, housing. They said no to every question. It's hard to get people to be moved, but in time, I think you can do it because you just have to stay at it and keep offering a better alternative for their life. But in this case, I was told there was just so much paranoia in dealing with anybody that you could not get through to them.
Well, and I can speak for this church very proudly that there are many, many ministries, missions, not only Room in the Inn, the Green Street Ministry, things that we do out of town. That is a big priority for this church and for many others, but more has to be done. to take it on citywide. All right, maybe one or two more questions. Put your hand up if you have one. Looking across.
Well, we're looking for questions.
Sure.
I do want to recommend Governor Haslam's book on faith.
Yep.
That in terms of public servants and faith, it's a
Faithful Presence. It's a great book.
It's a great book, and we should be very proud of anybody that can write such a book, living in our city as he does most of the time.
George Keith.
Mayor, you've announced a rather elegant plan to develop the east bank of the river fairly recently. Can you tell us any plans that you're working on with the state to, redevelop the interstate through there, I-24, I-65, to widen it to help out, since we're going to have a lot of new employees coming to that area?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Now, it's a great, so you have the East Bank, and nobody is there, right? You've had resilience issues, but what is clearly happening, starting with Oracle, is a whole lot of development is coming down. So if you get ahead of it with kind of a smart growth strategy, you can do all kinds of things that are going to be fabulous for the future of Nashville. So one of them is you can do a big resilience strategy on the 400 acres that no single parcel could ever do, but together you can help with stormwater issues. You can put in greenways and parks, and there's going to be, if you drive up on I-24, you see a lot of cranes on the west bank where the Newhoff packing plant is. And that is a pretty big project. It's done by the same people who did Ponce Market in Atlanta, for those who've been there in Atlanta. But where those cranes are is going to be a bridge built by Oracle over to the other side. It's a pedestrian bridge, and that's going to connect two systems of greenways on both sides of the river. But the most important thing I think we'll think about all this East Bank is the building of a new boulevard down to give Nashville a north-south spine that it never really had, and connect to neighborhoods through I-24. That I-24 had been kind of a barrier, and now to flow through I-24 with help from the state on underpasses, and then down the spine, which can also be a mass transit platform under a separate bridge over Murfreesboro Road, and then ultimately that'll take that traffic out to the airport. The spine, the effect of the spine will be to massively improve traffic on I-24 and 40 by giving local folks an option, particularly on the east side of the river, not to have to go on I-24 and 40 for 3 exits or 2 exits or to get across the river. You have an additional option. To the degree that maybe 35,000 trips are reduced from the interstate, that's equivalent to an extra lane on our inner loop by adding a local option for us to get around the city away from the interstate system. We'll always be dependent on the interstate system, but we had a luxury in Nashville that it wasn't that used, and we could use it for local. And so we never really developed our own internal transportation planning enough to be helpful. So this boulevard will be the biggest transportation improvement since Briley Parkway, really. And we just have not gotten ahead of the growth, but now it's so amazing that in a zero displacement, you're not tearing down houses to do it, you're just connecting in this kind of unique feature. Now, part of the stadium discussion is it's better laid out if it goes over where the stadium is currently. And in the meantime, the stadium folks would like a much better, what ends up being a much better deal financially for Nashville if they really put up most of the money and the state, the rest of the money, none of our money is going into it, and move the stadium further back on the site next to I-24. And then that allows the boulevard to go north and south, and then also where the current Nissan Stadium is to be a park, a really great civic space park, which downtown Nashville never had. And then maybe you get TPAC. The state is going to kick TPAC out of its current site, I feel, because they're the last tenant there. The museum is gone. The office building's not really used. Please leave. And then that becomes an excellent site for cultural facilities such as TPAC to give us a new kind of civic space, all enabled because you're able to push the stadium back. And pushing the stadium back and then having the team principally pay for it, any cost overrun and the cost of maintaining it and all the stuff that the city was liable for before, and a much better financial deal. What are you getting back from that? You're getting back their 17 years worth of leasing on our parking lots that they lease. So we're getting our land back to be able to do a high school, a TPAC, affordable housing, and some development too. So most places, teams are moving to build a stadium so that they can own the land around it. We're moving the stadium so that we can get our land back and use it for the city. It's a marvelous moment, I think, if the city can do it. But now, the city has never done smart growth planning before. This is not necessarily fundamental to the planning commission department. It has to raise its game, and you have to do other things that we have done. We created a Department of Transportation. You know, we never had a traffic planner. We never had a Department of Transportation. We had a Public Works Department, which is great, but was really kind of 35 guys with trucks and shovels. You got to be much more sophisticated in serving your city when you're doing this. You have to have a plan and be able to go to the federal government and get grants from them, for the state government to do from grants. And so the East Bank is one of the first deliverables of a really much more sophisticated and able city government that's getting ahead of the problem rather than being behind the problem. So.
Yep. I think that's a great, we may have to wind it down there. We're going through Leadership Nashville this year. There was a lot of talk about the East Bank and what lies ahead and what's coming up and what that could involve with Oracle coming, and that side of the river is going to be, you know, the next chapter, and how we go about doing that is very important. I want to give both of you kind of a last word before we close out tonight. So Professor Ali, anything that you would add to what we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and we could cover a lot more, but anything you would add as a part of this series or this conversation when it comes to faith, civility, community, anything we've talked about?
Yeah, I was just thinking actually, and thank you again for inviting me here, and it's always good to experience community together. And as the mayor was talking, I was just thinking about there's the reality and then the experience with reality. And as we have these new developments, which are very exciting, I think what we just have to make sure is that people feel like they belong there. And that they have access to it as well. And it just really does feel a lot of times that Nashville can sometimes seem as if it's a tale of three cities: the new Nashville, the old Nashville, and the left behind Nashville. And we need everybody to feel like they are building this city together as it is working with the rest of the state too. I think it's very important because we are a republic. And we're a democracy and a republic. I think it's really, really important for, as Nashville grows, we have one thing we're keeping in mind tonight, is that as Nashville grows, that the rest of Tennessee feels that they win with Nashville. And that it's not only Nashville winning, it's not only one city winning, it's a state winning, it's a region winning, it's a country winning. And I think the more and more we can think about that as we're building and growing together, the more powerful and healthier and more successful we'll all be.
Mayor Cooper, final word?
Well, I'm grateful for all of you. This is what makes Nashville, this church, this congregation, this community, this willingness to engage in a fair way. Nashville always was different. We were always proud of our tolerance, our community-mindedness. It's separated us a little bit from, I think we felt, our other neighbors in the South, and I cherish this continuing. I tell my office all the time, the thing that I am most worried about is that, and it's in this single sentence, that in this moment of our greatest opportunity, we have the most difficult politics. And that other generations, if we had seen this level of opportunity in Nashville, would have really been able to effectively deal with it and facilitate it out to the whole community. And it's not that we're gonna grow. Can we have a better city on the other side of this growth? And that's what we end up having to deliver on. And the only way to do that is with community engagement, was with people and being informed and involved. And having this thing that I'm grateful to being in a Christian church, any religious institution, any place that sets out to people a higher calling, a purpose. We're all, each of us, only on this earth for so long. The greatest meaning will come if we can chain that to a future that is better for our children and our grandchildren. And the idea of progress and a calling that we can be better is everything. And that's why being in this facility, having this discussion, I am so grateful for. I don't know how to amplify it or multiply it, but I would certainly like to, because again, and I don't think about it that much, but I certainly had people get off the boat with James Robertson back in 1780, and every generation in Nashville, I've had a relative in it, and I just am uncomfortable with the idea at this moment of our greatest opportunity, we lose it because of politics, because somebody invented the iPhone, or, TikTok or Facebook was unrelenting in its algorithm sorting. It made so much money off everybody being mad. And just this decade, and almost surely somebody is going to be able to de-stress that system in the future. But for right now, are we up to the challenge that's happened to us in the moment? And then we're in Nashville, and we wander right into the middle of this moment. We are considered by the very same Facebook people the #1 content creation capital in America. That's what happens when you're a university city plus the music industry, plus having a lot of other industries that help you be successful in the digital economy. So the opportunity, I think, is unrivaled, but we have to have the courage and the confidence to meet the moment. It's only possible with you. The same effort that you took to get in the car to come down here, the same level of caring to tune in on the internet today, to be informed and to be constructive, because we all have a higher calling.
That's right. Professor Samar Lee, Mayor John Cooper, let's thank them for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Next week, David French, in 2 weeks from tonight, governability. Thank you, guys. Have a great night. Thank you all.